call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, 1 minute, please. Okay.
Call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, 1 minute, please. Okay.
Call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m.
Whoops, sorry about that. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. And then I'll have the chair's statement on remote participation, which hopefully we won't hear an echo 3 times for all of our sakes. Consistent with the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, and Code of Massachusetts Regulation 940-29.10, which allows for remote participation in certain circumstances under the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law regulations. The Mendon-Upton Regional School Committee will be conducting this meeting remotely. In this particular case, all 6 members of the committee are participating remotely and virtually through video conferencing. This is consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 10th, 2020, which eased the requirements of having a meeting in a physical space open to the public and having a quorum of the committee physically present. Any and all votes will be conducted by roll call votes. Per usual, this meeting will also be live streamed and recorded. Great. So move on to the approval of the agenda and the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve tonight's agenda for October 5th, 2020.
Second.
We vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. Agenda is approved. Next items to approve the open session minutes from September 14th, 2020. Taking a motion to approve those minutes.
I move that we approve the open session minutes of September 14th, 2020.
Second.
Vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. Minutes are approved. And last, a motion to approve the executive session minutes from September 14th, 2020.
Motion to approve the executive session minutes of September 14th, 2020.
A
Second.
And vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. Minutes are approved. All right, next up we have the superintendent's comments.
All right, good evening, everybody. First thing this evening that I'd like to share with you, as I put in your background notes and also in the packet, is the district has been working very hard, particularly over the last 2 to 3 weeks, in creating a comprehensive safety protocol guide, which is kind of an overarching document for all of the safety measures we need to have in place before students can return for in-person instruction. So if you go through the document, and I really would like to really recognize the hard work and the tremendous effort of our assistant superintendent, Maureen Cohen, in working with different stakeholders and putting this together. But you can see a whole multitude of protocols for things like arrival and dismissal, lunch and snacks, how our classrooms need to be set up, recess, use of materials, the different hand hygiene protocols, and so on. And probably most importantly, in the back of the document is the whole actual decision tree process, which can be rather complex, that must be taken in the event that either a student or a staff member either develop COVID-like symptoms or test positive for the disease, or is a close contact of someone who is tested positive or is even a suspected case. So we have this document. Again, it's a dynamic document, but realize that our schools are also building off of it and have developed their own protocol guides, basically under its umbrella, but some specific protocols and instructions for the context of Clough, for the context of Memorial, and so on. So we are happy that we've got that in place. And if I could also do a quick share to also show all of you that we also have in place a pretty comprehensive reentry website, which we are constantly propagating with things like FAQs, with our various schedules for different programs, district calendar, and things like what the standalone remote option are all about, and so on. And that is something that I intend on sharing with parents tomorrow, along with our safety protocol document. Any questions on that? Okay. Secondly, something that is a piece of good news that has come out of this crisis that we've been in. But we received word that the USDA is extending a federal waiver that allows all schools across the country to offer free grab-and-go meals for students. And the caveat is that this waiver is going to last at least through the end of this calendar year, at least through December 31st. So what it means is for each of our school lunches and also our breakfasts, we will be getting full federal reimbursement. So as a result, all of our meals will be free of charge to our students, regardless of the student status, whether they're free, reduced, or fully paid lunch. Again, and I know we've recognized her in the past, but again, I'd like to recognize and thank the hard work of our food service director, Diane Mucci, and also her staff, who really, since the spring, has spearheaded the effort to reach out to students and families, regardless of their situation, regardless of level of need, to provide meals. I just heard from Diane, last week alone, the district served over 8,228 meals to Mendon-Upton families through the Boxed program. So congratulations, and it's a piece of good news. Again, we will ensure that this gets out to all of our families so that they know, at least upon returning for in-person instruction, all of our lunches will be free of charge. And then last but not least, but also very important, usually around this time of year, kind of in the early fall, we receive word from the Department of Revenue what our district's E&D or excess and deficiency certification is from the state. This kind of represents what our free cash is, so to speak, as a regional school district. So Jay, if you could talk a little bit about what the actual certified amount is and what it means and what the implications are moving forward.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So we did include in the packets a couple of different documents. What I really wanted to stress and make sure everybody understood is we presented to you some information a couple of weeks ago at the last school committee meeting, and it did change when I actually submitted everything. The biggest change is that we get circuit breaker reimbursement, and last year we received something called extraordinary relief, which is additional money if you have out-of-district placements that exceed 125% of what was allocated at the beginning of the year. And apparently we did qualify for that, and we got about $432,000. I've always been under the impression that it says on the Department of Ed's site that if you get money in 1 year, you can carry it over for 1 year. Department of Revenue doesn't agree. They say that you can carry over your regular reimbursement, but extraordinary relief you have to use in that fiscal year. I had taken that additional money and used it for FY22 in order to reduce our out-of-district expenses to help balance the budget out after all of the reductions and everything else. So I had to go back and in essence use the money last year, which means that we had additional savings in that account, which rolls into E&D. We'll now have to appropriate it out of E&D toward out-of-district tuition for this year because we still need to use that money this year. So that was the biggest change. There was one other adjustment that they had me do involving a grant that used up the money because there was about $6,000 left. And quite honestly, it was something that I forgot to do before I rolled the balance over. So I corrected that as well. So that's why there's a difference here. But we are going to have to do an appropriation out of E&D this year for about $432,000 in order to keep the budget within balance. Otherwise, we're short $432,000. Other than that, everything went really well with the Department of Revenue. They've asked me to do a couple other changes that are different than what they had me do last year. It seems to be a learning experience every year when I work with the Department of Revenue, but that's about it. So I gave you and it's sort of an explanation of that, as well as the balance sheet out of the software. And I think that should be all. Is there any questions on that? Does it make sense to everybody?
So we have to appropriate the 432K for out-of-district tuition.
We're
correct?
just going to appropriate it to the budget as a revenue source. And then that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it in the budget towards that out-of-district tuition.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. In essence, we're doing exactly what we were going to do all along, but we have to do it differently.
Yeah.
So it shows up as part of E&D because of that.
Right.
Okay, understood.
So that's the change from 2 weeks ago to tonight. Other than that, everything was pretty much what we presented a couple weeks ago.
But just, I guess for my own clarity, the circuit breaker piece the additional piece that we got was actually based on a look back, not a look forward, correct?
No, the extraordinary relief, when they do circuit breaker, like they come up with a number based on our out-of-district tuition, for example, for FY20 is going to be the basis for our circuit breaker reimbursement for FY21. And they do that over the summer. And typically, if you have a budget, like we don't, but when the state has a budget approved, that number is set in there right then. Then you submit stuff, and you can do it generally around January saying, hey, look, that's great, but we had 5 new kids come in and we're spending another $800,000. They'll revisit that and then say, okay, you qualify for extraordinary relief. So that's where it comes from.
Okay, that's the superintendent's report.
Thank you. So next on the agenda, we have administrators' comments.
Yeah, we're really excited to have John and Mary Ann share a couple pieces of really good news about Nipmuc Regional High School. And again, the continued and ongoing strong performance and innovation. And first, and I'll kick it to John and Mary Ann, just some incredible news about this past spring's AP or advanced placement scores. So John and Mary Ann.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. We know we have a packed agenda, but we appreciate the chance to be with you tonight. So thank you for that. I'm just going to share the screen if you don't mind. As Dr. M said, we've got some exciting news to share, both about the AP program and then also a new opportunity for the school. So we wanted to take a moment to go over where we're at with the AP program. If you think back and turn the clocks back to March, I know this was one of the questions that was on the minds of so many students and teachers as we transition to the unexpected school closure. For those who are not familiar, who are watching online, advanced placement courses are courses that are audited and certified by the College Board to be a freshman college level course. They are our most rigorous courses here at Nipmuc Regional. We offer about 15 of them, and students at the end of an AP course have the chance to take a test that is taken by students across the globe. And if they get a qualifying score of 3 or higher, they could opt out of they could test out of those requirements in college. And so it's a great opportunity to explore content that our kids are passionate about, but it's also gives them a door opening transcript, and it gives them the opportunity to take electives and courses that are of particular interest when they get on a college campus. So this was on everyone's mind as we transitioned in the spring. I want to mention as we get started that we have a lot of slides and we're going to move quickly. But if you wanted to follow along, you could check it out at nipmucprinciples.com. The slide deck is up there, as well as some of the information we're going to be sharing tonight. Across the globe, we did find that the fears around AP were founded for a lot of schools globally. Globally, AP exams were down by 14%, and qualifying scores globally in English, math, and science were down by 7%. I'm glad to tell you that was not at all the case at Nipmuc, and that this was a year that was record-setting for our students and our teachers. They did phenomenal work. They had the most tests taken in Nipmuc history, the most test takers in Nipmuc history, and on top of that, we had 81% of our students get qualifying scores. The last time we had a number that high was 10 years ago, when literally we had 100 less students taking the test. So it means we've opened up more opportunity for our most rigorous courses for more kids, and they're achieving at a really high level. Tonight, I'm going to take you through some of the data, and I'm going to focus on three main areas, three main data points. That's the number of students taking the test, the exams given, the mean score, and the percent of scores that are 3 or higher. And we'll be showing this data for Nipmuc, and then also contrasting it with Massachusetts and the global numbers. So I'll give a quick rundown. Again, feel free to go to nipmucprinciples.com in order to spend a little more time on these data slides. We kick it off for the mathematics department with 3 straight courses taught by Mr. Ron Cochran, who does a phenomenal job in our math department. Calculus AB, you see that in Nipmuc we had 16 students take it and a mean score of 3.38. Underneath each of the titles, I've included some of the more notable pieces of information about this administration for each of the test areas. You can see we had an increase of 0.15 in the mean of qualifying scores from 2019-20. Calculus BC, also taught by Mr. Cochran. This is a course that is new to Nipmuc in the past 5 years. It is a door opener course in that a lot of the most competitive 4-year schools are looking to have this on a student's transcript. It is the most rigorous course in the math department. You can see that students averaged a 4.05 on a scale of 1 to 5, 3 being a qualifier. And we had a 0.29 increase in the number of qualifying scores from 1920. Ron also teaches computer science A. We had nearly a 70% increase in the number of tests taken, and yet we're at the state average and above the global average. Staying in the math department with statistics, thrilled to see an 86% increase in Mrs. Gilchrist's statistics course. It's a course that really opened up AP for a lot of students who hadn't considered AP courses beforehand. And you can see that we had an increase there with a 2.9 average during the 1920 school year. Transitioning over to the English department, I want to give a shout out to Courtney Henry in English language and composition. Take a look at the 0.69 increase above the Massachusetts state average, and then compare this to the global average. It's almost a full point higher than where the globe is at. We saw kids excited about this course, feeling confident and prepared. In fact, we had over 80 kids register to take this class during the current school year. So the word is out that it's an awesome opportunity for our students. Likewise, for Mr. Evans' English language, literature and composition course, where you can see the 3.52 mean score, how that compares to the 3.19 in Mass, and the global average with a 0.33 higher mean than the Massachusetts score. Moving over to the social studies department, Mr. McIsaac's European history class, where we saw an increase of 54% in the number of tests taken, while still averaging that qualifying score of a 3. Microeconomics, taught by Rob Messick. Rob is a teacher in our math department. We filed this course under social studies to match up with the AP classification for it. Rob offers micro and macroeconomics on an alternating every other year cycle. And you can see the 109% increase in tests taken, that students are flocking to this course. It's a great example of a class that intersects the curriculum with the world beyond our classrooms and helps our kids to understand with a deeper level of complexity how finances work in our world. Psychology, this class had the highest single year increase in average score with a rise in the mean average of 1.09 points, taught by Mr. Gary Paris. You can see Nipmuc's mean score of 3.33. United States, U.S. history, A push taught by Chrissy Manzella. Again, 0.63 higher than the mass average. And you can look, if you compare it with the global average, it's more than a point higher than students across the globe are doing, with 92% of kids getting a qualifying score in Chrissy's class. Drawing taught by Allison Klish. You see that she had 6 students and 100% of them got qualifying scores, right on that Massachusetts state average. Spanish language taught by Senora Soto. Over the course of the past 5 years, this course is really shown as the most consistently high achieving course in our AP catalog. 95% of kids getting qualifying scores over the past 5 years. It's a testament to her teaching, testament to the Spanish immersion program, and a testament to the teachers and students who are taking a more traditional route who end up in that class and meet with tremendous success. No source of pride there. Biology taught by Sam Tallis. Sam's a 2-time Mass Insight AP Teacher of the Year, Teacher Award winner. You can see it in her scores with a 0.18 increase in the mean score from last year. Jen Field, also an award winner from Mass Insight. If you look at this number and compare it to the state average, it's a 3.80 compared to the mass average of 3.12, and again, nearly a point higher than the global average. I know I'm going quickly, but again, feel free to check these numbers out on principals.com. Physics 1, kudos to Jim Gorman, who has taken over this course. Jim's come in his 3rd year in the district and has done a phenomenal job. In the past 5 years, we saw AP Physics averaging around 1.95, 1.96. Jim has stabilized this course, and beyond that, made it a place that kids are excited, confident, and really having some powerful learning experiences. We love the trend that we see in this class. What you get is, when you look at the overall and the aggregate here, you have 435 exams taken by our students. That's a NITMOC record. 165 qualifying scores, most in NITMOC 60 years. And I said again, 80.9% qualifying scores. Back in 2010, when we had just 104 qualifying scores, that represented sort of what I call the high achievers club, the old mentality about AP, where they were offered to just 5 or 10% of our school's population. Now you see upwards of 50% of our upperclassmen taking AP courses. Shows through in the AP Scholars program, where we've got 73 kids who are recognized. To be an AP Scholar, that's an average of a 3 in at least 3 courses. They have an average of 3.42. AP Scholar with honors is an average of 3.25 in 4 or more courses. And then distinction, that whopping 27, that's kids averaging a 3.5 in 5 classes with an overall 4.04. So 73 of our kids getting accolades as standout for their standout performance. We're excited by that. Also excited about the trajectory of where we're going with the adjustments in the class schedule, and with the excitement around AP. We see an increase of 36 kids this year in our AP program, and an increase of 72 tests slated to be given. I think it speaks to the fact that we've not hit a ceiling. Phenomenal teachers, driven students, and it's making an impact in the AP program. We are thrilled with these numbers. I can't tell you how challenging it is, especially in a remote environment. It speaks to the tremendous talent of our teachers and skill and ability not only to know the subject matter, but access technology in a skillful enough way to help our students be so successful in such an uncertain year. We're excited about these numbers. We've also been really open in NITMOC about talking about the role of standardized tests in our schools, and recognizing that standardized tests are really one metric among many to judge the successfulness of our school and the quality of learning here. We've not been afraid to innovate, to try new things, from our inspired learning days to the creation of learning adventures, our partnership with the Department of Education and the Kaleidoscope Collective for Learning. We're one of just 2 high schools in Massachusetts focused on deeper learning to reimagine school for the remaining 351 communities. Our legacy program, lead learner workshops, food for thought lunches, and the hundreds, thousands of ways our teachers are innovating every single day, taking chances and breaking the old model of school to do something a little more inspiring, a little more connected to the world beyond our classroom. We are unabashedly focused on agency, inquiry, and authenticity in our learning. And we get the question often when we tell other administrators this, or we're working in trainers, they say, yes, but how do you ensure that your test scores don't go down as you focus on a more aspirational vision of school? And I think what we're excited about in presenting the AP today is that we're saying it's not an either or, it's a both and proposition. You can be successful with traditional treatment when you have the right people on the bus and the right community supporting you, and you can also pursue a more aspirational vision of school. And so tonight we're coupling our AP with the announcement of NITMUC's participation in the Canopy Project. Mrs. Moran's going to tell you a little bit about that.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So I echo John's thoughts. Obviously, it's really exciting to be here tonight to share not only the AP data, but pairing that with the news that we recently received about NITMUC and the Canopy Project. So NITMUC has been selected. We were nominated from a recommendation from Beth Holland, who has done some work with the district. Dave connected us with her, and who's part of the Learning Accelerator Network. So she's kind of been watching our journey and talking with us all along. But she nominated us, and we were selected to participate as a featured school on the Canopy, for the Canopy Project, I should say. As you click through the website, you'll learn that Canopy Project is essentially a nonprofit, and their goal is essentially to build the collective knowledge, it says this on their site, on a more diverse set of innovative schools and document the designs they are implementing. So what does that mean? That means essentially Canopy Project reaches out to schools like NITMUC, who are working to reimagine what school can look like and are on the journey to innovate, and collects data from these schools across the nation, and takes the data from these forward-thinking schools, does an analysis of it, and works to determine what those high leverage elements for change in schools is. So if you dig a little bit in there, you'll see some data for this year that's pretty raw, but the data from last year, they've done quite a bit of processing on that. So it's a neat tool for us, not only from the data aspect to find kind of what those key aspects of change is, but just also to expand our network. John and I and our school community, and I know Mendon-Upton is always looking for other schools that's doing the same type of work that we are, that have aspirational strategic plans when we find them. Sometimes we do a little stalking and see what they have, but our goal is ultimately to learn from them. We see ourselves as learners, and we want to get as much information as we can. So we're excited to expand our network. We're excited to connect with other schools that are part of this Canopy Project. Obviously, it's nice to be recognized for our work and to contribute to the research that's going on with the other schools, but just expanding our pool of resources in schools as we continue this work. So taking the work that's happening in, you know, some of the more traditional settings with AP, and as we reimagine those classrooms, to talk about how we're reimagining as a school as well. So that was a neat recognition, but also a neat network that we get to be a part of now.
Sounds exciting. What's the timeline for the project? Is it like what kind of like how long do they anticipate that goes on for?
Yeah, so every year they go, every year they go through a data collection process. So we just shared all of our data it was probably about 3 weeks ago. So they've gone through the process of collecting that raw data. They haven't done processing of this year's data. The project was only started in 2019, so they're relatively new. But essentially, it is a whole network of other innovative networks that has pulled together to say, we're working to pull all of these networks together to take that data and see what we can make of it. So my guess is that from year to year, they reach back out to the schools to contribute additional data. We said that we were available, obviously, to speak with further and to share additional things that are happening at NITMUC and across the district. So we're hopeful we'll hear back from them again.
Cool. Thank you.
I just want to comment on how excited I am about this, because the, you know, if you've been paying attention to what NITMUC has been doing for the past couple of years, the project-based work is just amazing. I mean, from working with NASA on projects for colonizing Mars, you know, coming up with new solutions to pharmaceutical problems. I mean, it's been just amazing projects, and you'd think the amount of time and the complexity of the projects too, because these are rigorous projects that take a lot of effort and a lot of time by our students. And you'd think that there would be some sacrifice in the test scores, but that hasn't been the case, and that's extremely exciting. That's really satisfying to know that you guys have pulled that off.
Great point, Sean. And I want to underscore what you just said, and I know John and Marianne feel this way. I think these results are nothing short of beyond incredible. The fact that, you know, and again, I was in those town halls, you know, with John and Mary Ann, and, you know, hearing a lot of parental anxiety come March, come April, about being out of school and what would happen with AP exams and so on, that there is that consistent high level of performance. And again, to John's point about, it's not like we're just cherry picking the top creme de la creme. You know, we're pushing now about 40% of all of the kids at Nipmuc are taking at least one AP course this year. That is incredible. Not only to have those results, but to have that level of participation. So kudos to the, you know, John and Mary Ann, but also those dedicated teachers and students at Nipmuc. Can't underscore that enough.
We agree. We're fortunate to have the people that we have. They're doing a phenomenal job, and we appreciate the chance to share that tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the committee before we move on? All right, so we'll move on to new business.
Okay, I think on the agenda is a piece around looking at our reentry plan and transitioning to the next phase. So I'd like to talk about that and give the committee a recommendation in moving forward. But keep in mind, the last time we talked specifically about our reentry plan, back on August 10th, there was an agreement that we would use a phased-in approach. And we've been in since September 16th, phase 1, where for all intents and purposes, we've been fully remote with the exception of our pre-K and some specialized special education programs. And today, we started with the hybrid model with our kindergartners. And we talked about looking at the data in kind of a holistic way and transitioning to phase 2 a week from tomorrow. So the Tuesday after Columbus Day, October 13th. And keep in mind, the intent would be with this phased in approach, and again, commensurate with the state guidance, is to then, from the hybrid model, to transition to full in-person instruction, you know, and obviously prioritizing grade spans and students with our greatest needs. And, you know, obviously what comes to mind are our youngest learners in the early elementary grades, and prioritizing getting them back. So in kind of looking at this, now keep in mind, the decision was made, I believe, on Monday, August 10th for this phased-in approach. And 3 or 4 days afterwards, the state started kind of this color coding mapping and kind of marrying it to the decision-making process for schools. So I show you the most current one that this data for the communities is released every Wednesday, usually late afternoon, evening. And it has a running, I believe it's a 4-week tally to take a look at what the average daily case rate is per 100,000. So as you can see from this map, the red is obviously where there are the most cases within the community, and then it goes down to yellow, green, and then gray represents fewer than 5 per 100,000. So as you can see, if you can make this out on your screen, here's Mendon, here's Upton. Right now, we are both in, both communities are in the lowest incidence. They're in the gray. So again, as I said, the Department of Education kind of mirrored and worked closely with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and kind of marrying what each of these color-coded metrics should relate to as far as an expectation for a learning model. So again, red would correspond to remote. The yellow would correspond to hybrid or a remote. And then the green, and now the bottom one, it initially started as white or unshaded, it's now gray, corresponds to either full-time, in-person, or a hybrid model. So in kind of looking at where we are in our two communities, before I get to that, the Commissioner of the Department of Education, Jeff Riley, has stated within the last couple of weeks that you really shouldn't use one single week's report for your community before making a change, whether you'd be going, say, from remote to hybrid, or reversing it, hybrid to remote, or hybrid to in-person, and so on, but to rather use 3 consecutive weekly reports. And again, each of those weekly reports represents kind of like a 4-week rolling average. So in looking at how it fits for our two communities, as you can see, this is the town of Mendon. The average daily incident rate for the most current report, again, which was last Wednesday, is 2.5 per 100,000 in the last 14 days. As you can see, as little as about 3 weeks ago, Mendon was in the yellow for the simple reason that there were 5 new cases in a single week. But as you can see in the percent positivity, again, Mendon is below 1%. They're at that 0.81%, which represents kind of like the low water mark for the entire state. And then for that same 3-week period, Upton has been consistently in the gray, as you can see, 2.4, 3.2, and 2.4 cases per 100,000. And the percent positivity is in that 0.7, 0.8 of 1% percent positivity. So our two communities, to be fair, are considered to be very much low incidence districts according to DPH data. So just last week, DESE also started releasing data on infections that have been reported. And then again, superintendents have the charge to report any type of infection, be it from a student or a staff member in the schools. And DESE released a report last Thursday for just a 1-week span, September 23rd to September 30th. And in total, total in that week span of 97 cases across our entire state. So that represents 63 student cases in 40 districts and 34 staff cases across 29 districts. So keep in mind, for perspective, there's a grand total of 315 districts across our state. So again, relative to the number of students and the number of districts, the number of cases was not very large. However, again, I think this is a conversation where there's pros, there's cons, there's risk, there's reward, and so on. The current 7-day positivity rate is 1.1%. It has been increasing. We've had some days where there's been 600, 700 cases in the Commonwealth. and where the positivity rate, on a daily basis is a hair above 3%. So again, I think there is a trend, unfortunately, where it's persistent. There's a slight increase. I've heard anecdotally, a lot of it is tied to college students. And I think we're seeing some evidence locally where you could have siblings who may be in the K-12 education space, but they have an older sibling who's a college student, who's still home or might have come home, who's tested positive and so on. So I think, it's a complex thing, but it's something that we're going to have to watch super, super carefully. So when the committee made the decision back on August 10th, we said, okay, we have to look at community transmission rate, but we also, it would be nice if we knew other districts that were jumping into either hybrid or full in-person in some cases. What does that data look like? So I've had the opportunity to connect with my colleagues, and this data represents about the first 2 weeks of in-person instruction. And you can see the districts listed there, including BVT, what their enrollment is, and realize just about all of these districts are doing the hybrid model. There are some exceptions. For example, Milford, K through 3 are doing full in-person, as is Blackstone Millville, BMR, for their elementary students, they're also doing full in-person. So you can see in that first 2-week span, I think we're talking from the 16th to the 30th of last month, there was a grand total of 2 positive test cases in students and 1 of a staff member, okay? Again, we're talking about the data here of 8 districts, and we're talking about, between 17 and 18,000 students in that 2-week span, and a grand total of 3 infections. Again, I think this is a conversation about relative risk. The feedback that I'm getting is there will be infections. And again, we can only control the ecosystem within our schools. We cannot control what's happening in the community and homes where students, where staff members go outside. But again, I think this is data that shows that mitigation factors and the safety measures that are put in place in a controlled environment like a school do have positive results. So then the third piece is, what is some of the work that's been doing, the district has been doing in the interim to ensure that both our kids and our staff members will be safe. And we've talked in past school committee meetings about the tens of thousands of dollars of PPE or personal protective equipment that we have obtained vis-a-vis masks and other protective gear, such as gowns, such as face shields, and so on. But then also the other measures, such as gel sanitization stations in many, many classrooms and common areas across all 4 schools. We've ensured that we have sufficient physical space, as you can see in that picture. Our classrooms, depending upon the building and the size of the classrooms, our desks are spaced out in configurations so that there is at least 6 feet of distance. And in some cases, we will be using some alternative space creatively. We've also, in high traffic common areas, and specifically in our front offices, we have protective barriers of plexiglass. We've also installed floor decals and signage appropriate safety signage that I think we've all become familiar with. We've also put in a ton of investment in electrostatic spraying of a broad spectrum disinfectant that'll be done on a nightly basis in all 4 schools by our custodial staff. As we've talked about, we've also upgraded and made some changes to our ventilation system, specifically inspecting and modifying the dampers so that there will be a greater fresh air exchange in all of our classrooms, and also changing out the filter system. And again, as we talked about before, thinking about, and I'd like to give our principals a great deal of credit in all of the micro planning and thinking about the logistics. Again, things like lunch and snack time and arrival and dismissal and so on, all those operational procedures. I think we've been very, very thoughtful in our approach. And then last but not least, very, very important, with the limitations on busing, we've also come to the conclusion in working with Telstone and Son that we do have, based upon our surveys, and for our parents who are watching, I'd really, really like to thank all of you. I think our response rate is something like 99.5%. So people really responded, talked about their preferred model, but whether they required transportation. Across the district, K through 12, we're about a little under 50%. So about 48% of our parents have indicated that they'll need busing for their kids. So with a hybrid model, that roughly translates about 25% of our usual capacity will be riding the bus. So we should be in very, very good shape, given the limitations based upon guidance to maintain social distancing with our busing. So with those 3 pieces, our community transmission, taking a look at the data from our neighboring districts, and also our readiness to be operational for some in-person instruction. I'm making the recommendation this evening to the Regional School Committee that we do proceed to the hybrid model as was in our plan, our phased opening plan. So phase 2, starting a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, October 13th, for all of our students in pre-K through 12. However, I do want to put the caveat out there that I think a lot of districts that are doing this in a very thoughtful manner are reassessing every week or every 2 weeks. And my caveat would be that we reassess this every 2 weeks, to coincide with each of our school committee meetings, because essentially we meet every 2 weeks. For this simple reason, I think the progress of this virus is highly unpredictable. It wouldn't shock me, to be very, very honest with all of you, if we were in a situation where perhaps multiple times we could be moving out of models between full remote and hybrid. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Again, our goal is to get as many kids back as soon as possible. And again, starting with our youngest learners. But again, at this point, we don't know how the virus is going to progress. We don't know if the predictions around a large second wave with the colder weather, with the start of the cold and flu season, if those pieces are going to actually come to fruition. So again, and we will be sharing more information with our parents as appropriate, between the elementary, the middle, and the high school levels. But with the hybrid learning model, there's 2 cohorts. So cohort 1 and 2 and cohort 1 will meet for in-person learning on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday and Friday. Cohort 2 will meet with their teachers for in-person learning. Wednesday is dedicated for fully remote for the entire district. And that solid morning block, kids will meet with their teachers for real synchronous real-time learning. And then the afternoon is for asynchronous assignments. So again, there is a lot here. Some of the pieces look a little bit different, obviously at the elementary level versus the high school versus the middle school and so on. But we, should you approve this evening, tomorrow we will be getting a lot more information out to our parents. I should note that we do have not a large number, but some 4-day weeks coming up, and next week is one of them because we've got the Columbus Day holiday a week from today, the 12th. So the mindset would be, even though our schedule calls for Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday, we would go with Tuesday and Wednesday being the days for in-person instruction for cohort 1, and then Thursday and Friday will be days for in-person instruction for cohort 2. So as I said, our intent as a leadership team is to push out all of the schedules. And I know our principals have already done a lot of this, but also a whole host of FAQs to be shared with parents tomorrow. So that is my recommendation. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that the committee might have at this time.
I have a question, yes, around, I'm sorry, Vicky, did you want to go?
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question just for clarity's sake, Joe. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about how these asynchronous learning days would work. And I'm really concerned about the amount of work that teachers have to do to maintain both an asynchronous learning class and an in-person learning class all in the same week. I'm wondering how practical that is and how long we're going to have to sustain that.
Well, that's a great question. I think the mindset with those 2 remote asynchronous days for our elementary students, they would definitely be checking in with their teachers for something like morning meeting, which they, have in any type of normal setting. I think we're also thinking about how we can do that, perhaps at the middle school with homeroom teachers and so on. I think the one non-negotiable that we feel very passionately about is making sure we have appropriate staff check-ins with our students who have some of the greatest needs during those 2 asynchronous days, and particularly students who have IEPs or 504 plans and so on. Again, depending on at the elementary level using Seesaw or at the secondary level using Google Classroom, the mindset would be teachers would be giving appropriate assignments, appropriate work, appropriate study for their students during those 2 days. I know I've seen, I've answered a handful of emails and some Facebook comments, and I've gotten some direct messages and so on along the lines of saying, well, why can't just the students just Zoom in? And why can't maybe the teacher just turn their laptop? Or why can't they just have a webcam and they could just beam their lessons? And that's a great idea, maybe in theory, but the practicality of it, the practicality, the logistics of it, the other implications that it could have, particularly with teachers of younger children and so on, it's just too complex and it's just too challenging. So again, I think I think this is a piece that still is going to remain dynamic. And to your point, I couldn't agree more in that I think remote teaching is extremely stressful for our teachers. And, you know, I think hybrid is going to be nice in the in-person piece, because I know our teachers really want to reconnect with their kids. And some of the feedback that I'm getting from, you know, my colleagues in Hopedale and Milford, and, you know, I was speaking with the superintendent of BMR earlier this afternoon. There is something to be said about these smaller class sizes. You know, we're going to have class sizes of 10, 12, 13, and so on, 9 in some cases. So I think during those in-person days, some really high quality things can be done with our kids, and there could be some really significant learning. So again, I think it is about having realistic expectations and pacing ourselves in a realistic manner, so it doesn't become something that's completely overwhelming for our teachers.
Now, I know right now there's way too little that we know about how the progress of the virus is going to go, and how the hybrid learning approach is going to progress. But do we have any kind of checkpoint for when a phase 3 might occur? Is that going to happen a month from now, or is it just too soon to even ask that question?
I think it's something that we have to wait and watch and see. You know, I would love to be in a spot a month from now in early November where, you know, we check in as a committee of where we are in the 2 communities, and as 2 communities, we're still in the gray, and we still have a very low transmission rate. And as a state, you know, it isn't, we're not back in the thousands of cases every single day and so on. So I think it is looking at how the experience, what's playing out in our communities, what's playing out across the state, because again, the virus doesn't necessarily know discrete town borders. And then again, it's taking a look at the experiences of our other districts that are 2 to 3 weeks ahead of us. Because again, the conversation is playing out there as far as what do we have to do to get back to all in person? And again, particularly starting with our youngest learners.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe, can you just talk a little bit about what specifically we'll be looking at when we reassess, and what will would trigger a switch, like a regression, say from hybrid to full remote, other than the 3 consecutive weeks of reports, like in terms of a local test case, like how would that work in terms of shutting down a school, multiple schools,
Sure.
the district?
So sure. So there was one case that I showed where Bellingham was one of the communities that has had one positive test case. And it was one student. However, in doing the contact tracing, there was a real concern of 4 staff members who had been in close contact. And what happened was the situation was that those 4 staff members started to say, hey, you know, I got to have a test, and in the interim, I'm going to go into quarantine. So it became almost like this cascade effect of like, oh my God, where are we going to find the subs for these people, and so on. So the decision was made out of an abundance of caution to close the school for a period of time. I think the thing that is very challenging about this is you can conceivably very easily have this, as we talked about back on August 10th, this cascade effect of quarantines of not only students, but also staff members as well. And, you know, we're not a very large district. And if you had a situation, say at Clough, where 5 or 6 staff members had to go into quarantine, you've got a serious personnel issue. So that's something that could trigger it. I think the state is deeply committed to try to have as much in-person instruction as possible. The only thing that I could see triggering it from the state level would be if there was a dramatic uptick and Governor Baker had to reverse some of the phase of where we are now. I think we're in phase 3, some communities' second step of phase 3. If it had to go back to phase 1 or phase 2 and so on, that would have some serious implications. We're lucky enough in this Zoom room, we have Leslie McGinnis, who is our lead nurse and also a nurse at Nipmuc Regional High School, and Trish Parent, once again, from the Upton Board of Health. I don't know, Trish or Leslie, if you want to comment on any of that local data.
Okay, Joe, I can just speak to Upton. I don't have Mendon's numbers in front of me. Upton has been doing consistently beautifully. I have seen a small uptick. It doesn't trigger us going to a different color or anything, but a small uptick in cases. I think it coincided with people starting to travel a little bit at the end of the summer. And also, as you mentioned, college-age kids either having been infected right before they left to go to college and didn't realize it, or came home for the beginning weekend. And then we found out that they had gotten together at college. You really can trace it to social activities that people have kind of come out of their holes after all of these months. People are finally going, okay, I'm going to go visit Aunt Susie and Uncle Tom, and lo and behold, for some reason, they end up sick at the end of that week. There's no rhyme or reason, but I think you will see a little bit more of this going on. Of course, when you start to go back hybrid, you'll see a natural increase in cases. It's nothing to be worried about, I don't think. Leslie and I have been communicating pretty much constantly whenever there is a question about what do you think about this scenario, what do you think about that scenario, we go over it together. We've been very in sync on our opinions about things, and Jesse has been staying pretty coherent with MDPH at this point. There was a little disconnect at the beginning, but everybody's on the same page now, which is reassuring to the departments of public health, I can tell you that. And we will go on and we will take every case and we'll look at it individually, because that's what you got to do. You have to look at each and every exposure individually, trace it down, look at who you need to go after as far as close contacts, have them stay home. It's not the end of the world to be home for 2 weeks. If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. I think everybody realizes that now. And I think everybody's been worried about this second wave, and it may happen because you're going to close the windows, you're going to close the doors, you're going to be inside with inside air, and that of course increases any infectious disease. But keep in mind, I think we're going to have a very low flu season. Everybody keeps saying, oh, the flu and COVID, but I think we're going to have a very, very low incidence of flu. The reason being is because everybody's wearing a mask and everybody's washing their hands a ton more than they did last year. And I can tell you that those two things are going to keep the flu numbers down, in addition to having to get the kids vaccinated, everybody having to be vaccinated. I think that should have been happening a long time ago, but I'm glad it's happening this year with this motivation. So I think it's going to be a great, low case incidence of flu. So we'll be able to identify those COVID kids pretty quick, we hope, and stay where you want to be, or even progress further as we go along. But we'll be right on top of it. Leslie and I will be right on top of it, as well as Ann Labonte, who is the nurse that handles Mendon. she and Leslie and I are all in the same communication group. So we're doing fine. We're doing very good. And may I say, you have some of the best and motivated staff and administrators and nurses that I have ever seen. I've been working with several different towns. I'm on committees for the district, for the region. And I can tell you that Mendon-Upton School District has done a absolutely phenomenal job with this. So you should all be very proud of yourselves.
Thank you.
I just want to echo our thanks to both Trish Parent and Ann Labonte for their help. I have spoken to one or both almost daily for different scenarios. Every time I think I have a good handle on the protocols, something else comes up that hasn't been discussed before, we hadn't thought about before. John and Marianne and I speak daily about all the different things that occur, and I'll reach out to Trish and Ann and always get a prompt response. I can run my ideas by them, what's their opinion of how we should handle a situation. And it's been a great collaboration and working relationship to go back and forth and have their expertise. So that's been incredibly helpful.
Well, the communities and the schools are in this together, most definitely. So please don't anybody hesitate to call the Board of Health and ask any question they want. We're always there.
Great, thank you. And so Joe, just to clarify, in terms of like what we're going to be reassessing every couple of weeks, the challenges, the successes, are we going to be surveying like students, staff?
Yeah, we're not going to do that every 2 weeks, but that's definitely going to be an element of it. Absolutely.
Right. Any other questions, comments from the committee?
Yeah, I had one more question going back to kind of the teacher-student kind of approach. I guess the question I'm wondering is whether or not there'll be approaches or mechanisms for students on their asynchronous days to ensure that they're able to reach or get contact with the teachers that they have in case they're stuck or they need help or those kinds of things there. So what will be those mechanisms and kind of ensuring that the students are able to stay connected on those asynchronous days and just aren't off on their own, so to speak?
Sure. I think through a lot of different mechanisms, obviously using Google Classroom or Seesaw, using email or office hours, things of that sort. Absolutely.
So are these things put in place consistently, or are these things just kind of on a ad hoc basis per teacher?
No, it's going to be something that's built into the schedule and built into protocols as well.
Okay.
And that'll be shared with our parents along with on our protocol document, but also on our website as well, Reentry website.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to know, just so that not only students know it, so that parents know it and understand it, can encourage the students and ensure the students are leveraging it and utilizing it where they need it.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be great.
Joe, in your conversations with the surrounding districts who are ahead of us in terms of moving to a hybrid model, what is the feedback that you're hearing in terms of the students' adjustments to that schedule and the teachers?
Students have been wonderful. Pretty much, Carrie, the feedback that I've gotten is kids are really, really happy to be back in school. I've also gotten very positive about compliance, things like masks and so on. The kids have been absolutely wonderful. So I think also initially a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of, wow, this feels a little strange. This is a little weird. But I've also gotten some really positive feedback that it's starting to become more normal, and it's starting, both students and staff members are starting to get into a flow, so to speak.
Have any sort of plan in place to sort of do like a social emotional temperature check for those students and teachers as this becomes more routine, just to continue the conversations we've been having over the summer about the stress and the anxiety that our student community and our teacher community have been experiencing? Is there something, along with monitoring how we're doing from a health perspective, how are these kids and these teachers adjusting to all of these transitions?
That's a great question. I think it's going to be something that looks different at the elementary versus the middle versus the high school. But I think having those mechanisms like morning meeting, having check-ins every single period, having, for many years, we've had the advisory program at the high school. I think those structures really become paramount.
I just want to make a comment that that there's an amazing amount of work that's been done in preparation here, and I think this kind of validates the approach that that you guys took for the time that we needed, the extra time that we needed to get to October 13th and to implement the hybrid model when it was appropriate for us as a community and as a school district. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
No, absolutely. Do we know of any of the towns or regions or areas that might be contemplating going back full-time at this point?
It is kind of interesting because the breakdown of districts was something like 65% of districts did hybrid, and only 5% were full in person. And just about all of those 5% that were full in person, Phil, were kind of smaller, all elementary districts that were part of like a larger region. So, none of my colleagues that I've connected, and I just connected with them a week ago, Friday, in-person meeting, for first one in months, were quite at that point yet, for the simple reason of thinking about either space limitations or busing limitations. And again, it varies from town to town, but we still have bus guidance that basically says 1 per seat. So even at the elementary level, with obviously smaller bodies, that becomes a problem unless you can get en masse X percentage of your parents to agree, we're definitely going to drive our son or daughter every single day. So the short answer is, I think everybody has the intent to bring everybody back, starting with elementary. But at this point, the only districts that are there are BMR and Milford's K through 3.
And how are they handling the distance component of it? I don't mean just on the bus, but I mean the in-classroom distance component of it.
Kind of interesting. BMR is using a lot of alternative space. I think they have something, an agreement with the Boys and Girls Club in one of the communities. And then they also have one of their schools that's really underpopulated. So they actually, some of their larger elementary classes, they've actually put into 2 rooms simultaneously. And the superintendent has also hired additional staff to kind of work to monitor. So I don't know the specifics of Milford, of how they're pulling that off, but BMR, even though they have full in person, they're maintaining that 6 feet of social distancing.
Okay. One last question.
Sure.
Sorry. 2 parts, but probably the same question. So what is the state's guidance on time on learning and total number of days for school? Are they relinquishing that? Are they adjusting it? I know they took the 10 days off from the full 180 and made it 170, but what about the 960 hours time on learning and some of those other things that are there?
The expectation is between in-person, synchronous remote, and asynchronous remote, you are supposed to meet those time on learning requirements for both elementary and secondary level.
And so how do they handle the translation of asynchronous into time on learning?
based upon what the school and the district has allocated for an asynchronous schedule.
So if the asynchronous schedule, for example, like us on Thursday and Friday for cohort 1 is basically essentially mirrors the day program.
Correct.
So that basically ensures that those hours are considered as time on learning is what you're
Correct.
saying. Okay.
Correct.
And are they maintaining the 960 or are they going to lower that based on?
I don't have the numbers, but in a normal 180 day school year, it's 900 and 990. So whatever it is prorated down from the 180 to 170 days, that's what we're being held accountable to.
Okay, thanks. That was my last question.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? So we need to take a vote, correct? Right.
Yes,
So
proceed with phase 2 of the hybrid model starting on October 13th.
So a motion?
Yeah, motion to commence with the hybrid model on October 13th.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to commence with the hybrid model on October 13th as planned.
Second.
Vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Phil DeZutter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. Motion passes unanimously. And so next we have a update on MCAS.
I don't know if it's quite an update, but you have in your packet, and Lee called this to my attention, MASC, and I believe specifically through its resolutions committee, recently passed unanimously a resolution calling for a moratorium on MCAS, at least for this school year. And I put it in your packet for your consideration. Lee, I don't know if you want to speak to it. I can tell you from my perspective as a superintendent, I would fully agree with this and I would embrace this. Again, I think, having an idea of where our students are is extremely important, and that assessments like the MCAS do have a role. However, I think in the extraordinary set of circumstances that we're in with this literally once in a lifetime pandemic and the stress that all of our parties are under, I think we would be well served to have a moratorium on MCAS once again this school year. I can tell you, based upon some recent meetings with the commissioner within the last week or two, and I know that there was a Board of Education meeting, I want to say it was last Thursday morning, there seems to be a very clear agenda to proceed with MCAS per usual in this spring school year. And I don't know if that's necessarily a wise approach. I know that it probably in all likelihood is a carrot and stick kind of approach to try to drive as many districts to in-person instruction as possible. But you got to realize the context in a lot of these communities like Worcester or Framingham or Chelsea is dramatically different. So that's my feeling. I don't know, Lee, if you want to speak to anything more specifically about this resolution.
I just wanted to put it on the table to hear what the other committee members felt. I was quite concerned, and I feel that it's really unwise to have MCAS held this year. From what I understand, they not only want to conduct the typical MCAS cycle, but they're also planning to test last year's 10th graders, Joe. Am I correct on that?
Correct, yeah.
So in this environment, when the remote learning model itself negatively impacts some of our most vulnerable learners across the Commonwealth, our high need population, our Ls, our special needs kids. I just don't understand the rationale here, and I find it very poor leadership, frankly, to call for this and push for this. I understand that the federal government, is not issuing waivers. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But at the same time, the mental health impacts of all of this, the fact that our teachers and our students and our administration are adapting on a dime, week to week in teaching methods and things like this, I just do not see this as being a wise choice. And I don't know, I was very disconcerted to hear that this was the plan from above. So anyway, that was my motivation on that. It doesn't
Lee,
seem
what did you mean by not? What did you mean by the federal government's not issuing waivers? What does that mean?
Joe, can you explain that process a little bit?
Yeah, so in order for MCAS to not be held, as it wasn't held last March, April, and May, two things have to happen. One, there has to be legislative approval here in Massachusetts, but two, since MCAS goes back to No Child Left Behind, there has to be a federal waiver from the US Department of Education saying, hey, Massachusetts, you don't have to give your state assessment this year. The Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has been very, very clear in stating that there is no appetite right now in the current administration to issue any waivers, because the position is all students should be in school right now.
I mean, is there any thinking about what if I were trying to push MCAS testing right now, I would be thinking your testing is going to be out of whack. It's not going to be representative of what the kids have learned or what the teachers have taught, or because of the extraordinary circumstances that we're in. So I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to accomplish with the testing.
I think it is again, using the carrot and stick approach. It is, something that's being put out there in not a quite so subtle way to say, hey, you better not be remote. And, our expectation is you're teaching to the standards, and you're teaching to the standards in a very rigorous and robust way. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But again, to Lee's point around, where our kids are and where our staff is and so on, and the stress of this year, I'm going to tell you that in a non-pandemic year, MCAS is a stressful thing. And it's a stressful thing for our best teachers in this district. I think it's a stressful thing for all of our teachers, but I'm going to add an extra layer for our best teachers, because our best teachers, a lot of them are people who are consummate professionals who take those scores very much to heart, okay? Almost too much to heart. And I can remember, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, presenting to all of you, or at least all of you that were on the committee, and I talked about when they redid, the new MCAS 2, and they just recentered it by changing their cut scores for every single grade. So I think the long and short of it, and honestly, but also cynically, Sean, and you'll appreciate this, is if they do administer MCAS, I'm certain that they're going to have to change the cut scores and so on. But again, I think it's about process. I think it's about what are your priorities? And, again, back to Carrie's point, we want our kids to learn, and we want our kids to learn at high levels. But there also has to be that social emotional piece that's a strong priority for our kids and for our staff. And that doesn't always necessarily align with teaching to MCAS and making sure you're covering every single standard and so on. And again, I'm not minimizing it, and I'm not saying teaching to the standards is not important. I can tell you our entire staff believes that. But when you're in extraordinary circumstances, as we are in now, with all of our lives being disrupted to the degree that it has been, I do think a moratorium, I do think a pause would serve everyone well.
Especially when you start talking about it being extra punitive for last year's 10th graders. And I would assume that also applies to the kids taking the biology
Yes.
MCAS exam. What would we have to be talking about doing some sort of review for these kids before taking these MCAS tests, which they're now a year removed from the content?
I think there would have to be some type of mechanism, yes. And again, thinking about now these guys that are part of the class of, I guess, 2022, who are now juniors, and now they're with their junior ELA teachers and their junior math teachers. And again, God bless them, because they're trying to get through their curriculum, but they also know they're doing their best to cover some of the gaps and so on. But now to have another layer of saying, oh, by the way, you now have to cover some of this territory that they were going to get in April on the MCAS math. So I'm going to say to Courtney Legia, who's teaching Algebra 2 to juniors, oh, you now just go back and do a little geometry with the kids, because, that's what they, So again, it's got a lot of implications for everybody.
So
we've semesterized the school year. We put more pressure on the teachers to get all that content done in essentially the half year, albeit they have more class time. But then we've got the pandemic, and we've got any kind of cohort back and forth swapping the kids around. I mean, I really think it's too much.
Again, to my earlier point, and again, I do not have a crystal ball, but I know, Sean, we discussed this, that it is very strongly in the realm of the possibility that there could be a migration back in and out of remote, not only for us, but for all districts across the state. I hope it's not, and I hope it actually goes in the opposite direction, but I think it's something that's in the realm of possibility.
It will happen, because you're already seeing it. You're already seeing some schools which will register a case or two, and then they'll go into full remote, and then they'll come back into hybrid. I mean, that's already happening. I guess the question I'm having is, so from an opt-in, opt-out, is that at a state level? Is that an area that we have the right to do? If we don't do, there's an impact in terms of, if I got that right, federal funding, or an impact in terms of state funding?
You really, really want to advertise to our parents watching, well, you can either opt in or opt out to MCAS. That's something that I
don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah, that's something that can totally be handled at the local level. It could be handled. There are school committees, there are parent groups that strongly advocate for that. Probably at this point, I'm not going to be, a rogue superintendent leading an opt-out of MCAS campaign, but it is something that does happen in some districts, a really, really small minority of districts.
Well, I guess this is an unusual year, as Leah's saying.
It is.
Unusual circumstances. I look at it from the standpoint of, to what Sean said and others. I mean, you've got a situation where, you could theoretically go back to our junior class and say to those teachers, like, hey, let's do some prep work over February and April vacation kind of thing. I mean, it's a little ludicrous.
Yeah,
it is.
To expect it. Now, I agree, if everybody goes ahead and does it, and everybody's kind of in a hold harmless kind of state, that's a little different. Because that's just an assessment of, I'll call it the impact of COVID versus basically driving it from the standpoint of making educational decisions and holding schools to plans based on, potentially the outcome of what's been an unoptimized, learning environment for the last
6-7 months.
years. Yeah. So, and it's going to be, it's not going to be optimized for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here we are, we've just got an example of how the kids in the district have performed so well on AP tests, which I think are probably more rigorous than the MCAS.
Absolutely.
And they've done that by doing project work in addition to just teaching the material on the test. So I have a lot of faith that our district and our kids can pull off MCAS tests. That's not the real problem. The problem is having a realistic approach in a very extraordinary time for both our students and our teachers. So I kind of agree with the resolution that's in the packet that you gave us, and I would vote to submit that into the state if that's what the plan is.
Are we taking a vote on that tonight? Has everyone had?
If you want to, you could take a vote to agree with the resolution, and then it's just communicated back to MASC that the Mendon-Upton Regional School Committee took a vote on October 5th in complete agreement with the MASC resolution on MCAS.
I make a motion to send the resolution as written and approve it as a school committee and send it to the MASC.
Second,
Vote by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye. Motion passes unanimously. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So moving on to community comments, we have several. And I lost my page. Here we go. Okay. Try and some we've already touched on, but someone asked about are we deep cleaning the school on Monday holiday week? So I guess that's if there's a holiday and we're changing the 2 days, does the deep cleaning happen on Monday versus Wednesday, or how is that going to work? I know like veterans.
Yeah, it would be Friday. It would in all likelihood be the Friday evening and potentially some of the weekend as well.
And are there updated numbers of from the survey of hybrid versus standalone remote?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our number of standalone remote actually went down. So initially we were in the ballpark of about 270 K through 12. And right now we are at 194 K through 12. So the high school was a little bit different in that because of working it out within the confines of their existing schedule, those standalone remote students started when we started on September 16th. So now we have about 154 students, K through 8, who will be in the standalone remote option. And again, as I described during the last school committee meeting, it looks a little bit different at the elementary level versus what we're doing with middle school students.
Sure. Someone's asking about the air filtration system at MISCO. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Just like the other schools, what we've done is we've increased the filtration in each of the unit ventilators. We used to have something known as MERV 8 filters. Now they are MERV 13 filters, which means they filter out a finer particle that would be airborne. And then we've also changed the damper controls so that there is a higher level of air exchange on an hourly basis. It's basically between doubled and tripled what our existing air exchange was.
Question about what asynchronous school days will look like for children on IEPs. Will that be included in the information that's being released?
It will, and it's extremely important to us at all levels to ensure that a special educator or a para-educator will be on each of those days connecting with students with IEPs in a meaningful way to ensure that he or she gets any type of help that he or she needs.
What's the feedback on hybrid and constantly changing the schedules, especially our youngest who thrive on structure and consistency? I'm not sure what kind of feedback, since we haven't started it yet, but any comments on, so I guess we'll find out. I believe that question was answered. Solicit feedback on remote learning. I know the students at Nipmuc were surveyed. I don't know if students at the other schools were surveyed in terms of remote learning.
We solicited feedback from the middle school students as well.
Okay.
But yes, we will, when we get into the hybrid and we do, we'll make sure that we survey the middle and the high school students once again.
Will students at middle school level have some sort of check-in with teachers and or structure to the day following their schedule, or would they be expected to work on their own all day? I believe that's a question about asynchronous learning again, so that would be. And then a question just in general about the health guidelines and symptoms and when they would be able to return to school. So more questions about that.
Yeah, so what we will, maybe I can do a quick screen share. It is a lot of work putting together some of these pieces, particularly around our district protocols. And let me see if I can quickly find this. But what we've done is we've put in place, based upon the state guidance, this pretty involved decision tree. So this is part of the document that our parents will be receiving. And the document from the state isn't exactly user-friendly. It's a 19-page document. And what we've done is we've put together kind of everything that was in that document and kind of distilled it down into kind of like a decision tree. So again, what happens if a student has COVID-19 symptoms? And what are the steps that need to be taken as far as the child being tested? Was the test positive or negative, and so on? So some very, very specific things. What happens if it's a staff member? What happens if a family member is a close contact and they tested positive, and so on? So we've got all types of possibilities here that kind of spell out in very, very clear terms. Here's one. What happens if a student had symptoms on the bus, and so on? So we will have all of those pieces so that parents can be very well informed.
Great. All right. So Move on to correspondence. Do we have any?
Do not.
All right. Other matters not anticipated by the committee within 48 hours of the posted meeting?
None.
Future agenda items, additional COVID-19 policies. That will be at our October 19th meeting. And with that, we will roll call to executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, exemption number 3, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with the district's labor associations, because doing so in open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. The committee will not return to open session. And we are voting by roll call.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Bill Desutter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everyone.
Night.